Hello, everyone. I'm trying something new today that I've been talking about with friends and haven't done yet. I'm going to record today's news from the perspective of environmental leadership. And this is my first time doing it, absolute first try. I think I'll go for about 10 minutes. I'm going to go to a news source. Today, I think I'll start with the regular one, the New York Times, and I'm going to read some of the top headlines with my commentary. I'm doing this because I keep reading stories, and sometimes things I love, sometimes things I think they get off, and there's a lot I have to say. And when I write blog posts about it, I don't get as much across, and it takes a long time to do it. And I think this is something that like AM talk radio does all the time. It's like they read the news and talk about it from a certain perspective. I'm going to give it a shot. Hopefully it'll work. We'll see. You're going to see how my thoughts work in real time. So here's the New York Times today, July 22nd, 2019. And let's see. So the top story about Hong Kong protests, haven't been following that too much. Shut down traffic in San Juan, Equifax, questions for Mueller. Let's see if there's something related to the environment. So far, not a lot environmental related. Well, this is kind of funny. Let me go to the top again. Climate forward. Which trees should you plant? All right, I'm just going to stick. I decided I was just going to stick with the top stories, not clicking any articles. So here we see climate forward. Which tree should you plant? I got to say, for a long time, I felt like I should start a garden in my apartment. I have a window that faces southeast, and I didn't do it for a long, long time because I thought, how do I do it? Do I buy? What kind of plants do I get? And so forth. And then I learned what I always learn, and I keep forgetting, which is you just start. In this case, my sister, she has a yard out in Queens, and she's got a front yard and a backyard. She's been growing stuff. She just gave me some clippings. And I did what I should have done a long time ago, which is simply to just get a plant, put it in the window, start watering it. If you water it too much, you figure it out. If you water it too little, you figure it out. And I want to contrast this. Well, I want to tell you about the experience of nature, because right now on my windowsill, I'm going to turn and face away from the camera, the microphone for a second. I have, from left to right, I have a rosemary plant, which is growing like crazy. I have 2 oregano plants plus a basil plant, which are growing like crazy. I got a mint plant, another mint plant. Then I got 2 beds of, it's not arugula, but it's like spicy, kind of mustardy tasting, very strong flavored lettuce greens. There's like salad things that I stick in my salad. My mom bought me this thing called Spicy Mix. It was a little package of seeds. I just got some old planters that neighbors were throwing out and just got some dirt, put them in, and started growing. And it's amazing to see this stuff grow. Wait, I haven't finished. I now have some big tomato plants, and the tomatoes are just starting to come out. And the tomato plants smell so good. A couple of years ago, I had and a fig tree. The fig tree is growing. I'll talk about the fig tree in some other time because it's growing okay, but it's got some spider mites on it. So I got to figure out how to save that tree. And I want to contrast the joy that I get from growing these plants and just seeing them grow and just watering them every day. And what I contrast it with is, some friend of mine told me about, he was like, check out this friend of his doing some ecotourism, which was flying people to go up the Amazon River. And I'm looking at these pictures of seeing these people going up the Amazon River. They look like overweight Midwesterners, and they're just kind of passively sitting on this boat. And now to fly to the Amazon from the United States is tens of tons of CO2. And to go up the Amazon is like, I think that what they're trying to do is explore nature and get an experience of nature. In the process, we all know that they're destroying what they want to see. For one thing, there's the CO2 going into the atmosphere. We all know the headlines about global warming and things like that. Then we also know from, we have wars fought over the supply lines to keep them safe and so forth. And also, enough of these tourists going up the Amazon, we're going to see these lovely, dainty cafes spring up on the banks of the Amazon River, way up up near the source. And I put to you, look, I don't know what other people get out of their experiences, but I put to you that my experience of planting these things is putting me just as much in touch with nature, except the big difference is that all this traveling to explore these places, these untouched places, there are no untouched places left. To the extent they're getting something somewhat untouched, they're polluting it. They're causing it to change. They're leaving nothing for future generations. But they're destroying it, and I think that they're not getting the same thing that one can get. That you talk about the universe in a drop of wine, and you can get as much nature as you want, except by growing plants is one thing you could do, except I'm growing things. I'm not destroying things. So that's one thing that comes to mind when I think about what trees to plant. So I got a fig tree growing. We'll see how well it grows. I also want to mention that in New York, I found a bunch of trees that are berry trees. There's Juneberry trees and mulberry trees that you can go and pick these from, and they're delicious. And I love getting these things. Let's see, immigrations, the trees might save us yet. So here's another story that I'll comment on. So this says that, I'm not sure what this says, but people talk about planting trees as a way of sequestering carbon, getting carbon outside of back out from the environment, from the atmosphere. Well, the thing is that to the extent we chop down trees, there's only so many trees we can put back up. We're going to mostly replace the trees that came back down. I don't know if people know this. How does carbon dioxide work with trees and plants? Do people know that plants are made out of air? I used to think when you put seeds in the ground, as the plant grew, it would take soil and make the tree or the plant out of soil. It doesn't. It gets some nutrients from soil. It gets water from the soil and when the rain comes down. But really, it takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, takes the carbon out, makes itself out of the carbon, and puts the oxygen back out into the air. We do the opposite. We take in oxygen, and when we burn energy, we put carbon dioxide back out. That's what you hear about all the cows that are belching and causing that's more methane, carbon, I think it's CH4. But so a tree or any plant is made significantly out of carbon from the environment. So if you plant a plant, you will take carbon out. About how much carbon? Well, you can figure it out from the chemistry, but it's basically how much the tree weighs. There's other stuff in there other than carbon, but roughly speaking, how much the tree weighs is how much carbon you've taken out. Or when you chop down trees, that's how much carbon you're putting back into the atmosphere. So big trees, that's tons of CO2 that you're putting out into the atmosphere, accelerating global warming. So if you plant a tree, as it grows, it will take carbon out of the air. When it dies and decomposes, that carbon will go back into the air. So trees don't consistently keep pulling carbon dioxide out. They just pull out enough to build themselves. So if you grow one tree, well, if it then dies and then decomposes, you haven't permanently done anything. If you grow a forest and the forest takes up more area than it used to, land area, then you're taking taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. But there's only so much space that you can put trees into, and a lot of that is where forests used to be. So yes, it works. It's a limited amount, so it's not going to save us completely. What is, I think, more effective is not cutting stuff down in the first place, also not burning other fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels that we got out of the ground, oil, coal, that stuff, we're not really replacing that with trees. There's a lot more of that stuff that we've pulled back out. So if we want to get that back into the ground, I'm not aware of any effective techniques that are cost effective, that engineering-wise work. There are a few things that are possibly on the horizon, but it's possible and likely that if they ever do work, which is not a given, that may take a long time for that to work, possibly longer than we have. And none of this is conservation. Not getting the stuff out in the environment in the first place is more effective. And this says nothing about the oceans, which take up much more space. And I don't know a whole lot about how algae and things work there. But what we do on land is of limited effect. Not putting the CO2 in the atmosphere in the first place is much more effective. Let's see if there's any other stories here. Wealth tax, radical socialists, guns, Gulf states vie for power. How much is a view worth in Manhattan? Try $11 million. All right, so there's not a whole lot here. Maybe that's just as well on the environment. That for the first time I do it, I picked two stories. Let me keep going and see if there's any more, because I feel like I want to do the first one kind of be important. Health facts aren't enough. Should persuasion become a priority? Looks environmental from the picture, but I don't think that's environmental. U.S. news, politics, New York business. New York power outages. After 50,000 lose electricity, service begins to return. Okay, I want to talk about the power outage that New York got last week. I want to talk about energy security. There's an article that I read. Okay, what is energy security? Energy security is, what if the power goes down? Can people still get energy to do what they want? And that usually means keeping power supplied at 99.99999, whatever I don't know what threshold people want, but people want to make sure, or energy security means that you get a certain, like maybe an hour of downtime per year, and you don't want to get lower than that. There's a couple ways to promote energy security. The way that they're doing it is to build up the energy grid to be redundant and supply all the power necessary so that no matter how much power people want, they get it whenever they want it, however much they want, in whatever form they want. The costs to do that in this article in Low Tech Magazine are tremendously high. It's really hard to make sure something never breaks. There's another way that the guy who writes in Low Tech Magazine writes, is that if you simply don't need the power up that much, if you drop down to needing it 90% of the time or 85% of the time, suddenly your costs drop precipitously. And if you have a population that can handle, you don't need all the power all the time. If you can't use your dryer, hang your clothes up to dry. Well, I hope you hang up your clothes up to dry all the time anyway. I stopped using dryers a while ago. But if you don't need it, actually what you develop is resilience, which is more effective than security in terms of a population that's safe and so forth. There are some things that are going to need power, like, I don't know, probably military installations, they're going to need power more, but they can have generators. But for the entire population, for 350 million people or so, the strategy of, oh yeah, and I forgot to mention that when you make the power available like that, people don't know that you are trying to get this energy security stuff. They just know they want power. And so once it's more available, they tend to use more, which causes the costs to supply more and to keep the uptime up at that 99.999% higher. Whereas if you have a population that doesn't necessarily need energy all the time, it becomes much cheaper to be secure or to have supply, to have the energy available when people want, which isn't as much. It works much better. Everyone's much more secure. The population is much more resilient. We're more secure for attacks on the power system, on the power grid, and it works much better. And so if there's an outage like that, actually outages like that, not that big of a deal. There's some problems, but if we plan for things, we don't plan for things going down accidentally, but we are able to handle things like that, and it's not a big deal. I think we end up being much more secure, saving much more money, being much more resilient, and getting back to nature, getting back to being able to handle time with each other, not necessarily screen time and so forth. Okay, so that's 3 stories that I picked off the New York Times today. I hope it wasn't too boring just looking at the screen. And my first try. We'll see how it goes.